Hello and welcome into the Sporting Jacks Report along with Mauricio Ruiz. I'm Cole Pepper. Boy, do we have a lot to talk about here as we work our way through the first month of the year. U.S. men's national team back on the pitch. We've got a lot to talk about with the USL Championship, and coming up in just a bit, we're going to talk about launching the women's team here at with the USL Super League starting to start. Becky Burley is going to join us, but first I want to remind you to become a member of Sporting Jacks. It is absolutely free. Here's all you do. Just go to sportingjacks.com. You'll get discounts on Sporting Jacks Club merchandise, an invitation to attend exclusive insider events, automatic entry into competitions for chances to win special prizes and experiences, and you'll receive the Sporting Jacks monthly email newsletter. Plus, you can place a deposit on your season tickets if you like, or receive first access to seats and a special limited edition Sporting Jacks founding member pin. All right, before we get into the USL Championship and the USL Super League, Mauricio, let's talk a little bit about the U.S. men's national team, who, since we've last spoken to you, played a friendly, and it was an interesting thing. Playing against a Slovenian team, losing 1-0, the result really not so important. What I found very interesting was the player selection from Greg Berhalter, who he brought in, and the makeup of the group that was on the field.
Yeah, one positive thing that I'll take from that experience, they played at the San Antonio Stadium, the USL Championship Stadium, sold out crowd, 9,100 plus at that stadium. So great venue to be able to host one of these friendly games, kind of in between seasons, if you would. But you're right, as far as the roster, we're in a Copa America and an Olympic cycle. So that team didn't really near either or. There were 11 debutants that played in the game. Not all of them even played. Some of them started. Some of them are out-aged to be in the Olympics. Berhalter is not the Olympic coach. He is the Copa America coach. But Coach Mitrovic is the Olympic coach. He was there. He's part of the staff. So there's some things that it looked like the team was going to be an Olympic-based team. But he also brought in a lot of players that were not. They're not going to be aged appropriate. So it was weird. It was kind of like it's in between. It's not the A team. It's not the B teams. Potentially not even the C team. The result not so much to care about. But interesting kind of how he selected players that may not be part of the cycle. Yeah, 9
of the 11 first-timers are of the age who could play in the Olympics. You have U23 for the Olympics on the men's side. So it's the guys getting a little bit of international experience, and you have to think that was part of a bigger picture plan, whether it's from Berhalter or U.S. Soccer in general, saying, hey, let's get some guys their first taste of international play at the senior level, especially guys who are going to represent the country potentially in the Paris Olympics.
Yeah, and you had a player like Diego Luna, that former El Paso player, plays for RSL now. He did really well. He's one of the players that actually stood out. He typically plays in that traditional number 10 role. He's playing more as a left winger, kind of tucking in. But I saw a few players like himself kind of really stood out and made themselves a bit of a challenge and a name, maybe even for the Copa America potentially. I mean, long shot, but certainly for the Olympic team. I think a few players took this opportunity, as you mentioned, to play a senior level game, to make the most out of it. And I think Diego Luna is certainly a player that did that.
All right, we'll keep a close eye on the progress for the U.S. men's national team and the women's national team as well as the Olympics approach and Copa America approaches here this late spring and into summer. All right, let's talk now for a moment about the USL Championship. A couple of big news pieces have come across in the last week. Number one being Rhode Island FC signing Albert Dikwa, who was the Golden Boot winner and the most outstanding player in the league last season. This is a big signing for a team that's really trying to put something together.
Yeah, and really, as Albert Dikwa went last year, Pittsburgh really had that run towards the end of the year. They had a really good run in U.S. Open Cup, and really he started kind of hitting his stride around that time, and you couldn't keep him off the score sheet last year. He became really the most prolific player in the league, which is why he won, the Golden Boot and MVP. Rhode Island also, they just got on J.J. Williams from the Rowdies a couple weeks ago. So the combination of the two. So Dikwa is a big statement for sure for a team that's, it's a new franchise team. But the combination of the two, up front, dynamic, J.J. more like a connector pass, big body. But Dikwa, what a great finisher, dynamic going forward. I think there's a statement that Rhode Island's trying to make here. They don't want to, we've talked about it before, they don't want to be the new kids on the block. They're just going to be happy to come around. And they're making a statement with the way that they're selecting their roster and putting it together. So they expect Rhode Island. Obviously, they're gonna have a lot of bumps and bruises to kind of get through certain things. But that's a pretty good statement, a pretty good start.
Yeah, with those two guys up front, you expect some goals to be scored there in Rhode Island. The other news on the coaching side, interesting to see how things have sort of developed since the USL Championship final. Now Phoenix Rising appointing Danny Stone, who had been an assistant there, as their head coach going into their defending championship season.
Well, you look at the timing of it, right? Coach Guerrero did a great job. He moved on into a different role. Who are they going to find? I mean, preseason is around the corner, and he just left about a week or 2 weeks ago. So if they have someone in Denny Stones that they're comfortable with, they won the championship. You don't want to really upset too many things. You want to move too many pieces around. Their roster stayed pretty significantly close to last year. Now you remove your head coach, and they might bring in a whole new staff. And like as you mentioned, Denny Stones, he's capable. They felt that they can continue culturally building with them. I'm sure he was a huge part of the championship run. If they felt in-house that they had to play, the person for the job, why search so much more? They did do a bit of a search, but ultimately they felt they had the guy inside and helped them to a championship.
It's going to be interesting to see if there's that kind of continuity from one year to the next, one coach to the next after winning a championship. Let's now bring in Becky Burley, who joins us to talk about the progress for Sporting Jacks in the USL Super League. The Super League launches in August. Sporting Jacks will be coming in the coming year. But let's talk about what is essential in not only just bringing up a women's club, Becky, but also when you're launching a women's club at the same time as a men's club. What's really essential to be thinking about?
Well, you make such a good point, because I think you're right. I mean, it just kind of layers it on when you have two teams, and that's really exciting, but it also brings its challenges too. And, clearly from an essential standpoint, like getting the right technical staff in place, and the technical staff includes everyone from, the sporting director to the coaches, to the assistant coaches, to the support staff. And if you have good people, that's what makes your organization run. So we all know how important that's going to be. And then, of course, we've got the whole other side of the organization, which is helping us create sustainability and making sure that we are doing what we need to do financially, responsibly, and all of that. And those people are just as important, because their impact on the organization is huge.
All right, what about some commonalities and some of the traits that the men's and the women's team in the same club, what things should they or could they potentially share in terms of common traits?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I don't think it's one that often gets asked, especially when you have organizations that have the same sport, or a male and a female version of the same sport, or even just a male and a female version of sport. I think the number one thing that I would talk about is, how are you going to integrate into the community in terms of the involvement, and how do both teams make that feel very seamless? Like neither team feels left out, neither team feels featured, neither team feels like anyone is over the other. It's more just like, hey, this is Sporting Jacks and we do this together. And then I think the other part of it is too, like, what are you going to do from a holistic approach to your athletes? And that is also universal, like whatever is done with the women's team and the men's team should be along the same lines. And of course, allowing for different needs of each group. And things that you don't share, maybe the game model, like the women are going to play different than the men and vice versa. But I do think the ability to support one another and be thinking partners for one another is crucial.
One of the things, of course, that you try to do is adopt best practices and stay away from the pitfalls. So what kind of misses have you seen in other programs as women's programs are launched, whether it's soccer or other sports?
That's a good question too. I think that a lot of times you get to thinking about even just from a facility standpoint, right? So for example, like how would you deal with a training room if you're training at the same facility? If those teams overlap, like a training room is a place where there's a lot of things going on in the training room that require some privacy, and so figuring out ways to make the facilities useful to both groups, but at the same time, not overlapping in a way that makes people feel uncomfortable. It's funny that you ask, but I've been part of an organization where, especially on the women's side, like the lack of forethought about, for example, having a restroom at the practice field, and you would think like that's pretty basic, but I have been in situations where that's been a little bit of a challenge. And I think, again, like we've talked about before, how do you find a way to integrate them in the community where both feel very valued?
Well, as mentioned, in August, the USL Super League launches, kicking off for the first time, and going to be an exciting moment when that happens. What are you going to be looking for from the Super League this year?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to see what that looks like, and props to all those teams that are starting in 24, because that's a sprint. They have been on a sprint, and tip of the hat to them for getting everything they need to get together for that. So the things I'm kind of looking for are like, what are some creative ways that this particular league uses to create fan and community engagement? How do we build our rosters, especially being on a different calendar than the rest of women's soccer in this country? I think that international calendar is such a huge asset. And then certain things like just like, what does it look like? Does it look like there's parity? What's separating the teams that are maybe higher than the other teams? What are some of the logistical things that we get a chance to actually learn from these teams that are starting in August? But it's certainly like really, really exciting to get this thing going. To bring up a point, like I think when I started the soccer program at Florida, one of the things that Jeremy Foley, our athletic director at the time, did was he allowed me to have a 1-year runway to creating that team, which at that time was pretty groundbreaking. And the amount of things that I learned, not just about, getting things in place, but the culture of the organization and how to integrate into the community, like we talked about, like all those things would have been very difficult to happen without that runway.
Yeah, that time is a valuable resource, especially valuable if you use it the right way, which is always the challenge.
As we talked about last week, you were at the United Soccer Coaches Convention in Anaheim, took home a little hardware for your lifetime achievement in college soccer. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What was your takeaway from that convention and the people you were interacting with?
Hey, you know what was really nice about that convention is normally our coaches convention is in the Northeast or somewhere cold, maybe the Midwest. This time it was in Anaheim and it was amazing. You walk out of the convention center and there's 20 food trucks to choose from and you can sit outside and have lunch. And I will say, like that sounds like a little bit of fluff, but at the same time, I think I saw more integration amongst coaches than ever before because of that common area and common space to connect. And you would have, there was a bunch of these picnic tables and you would have, pro organizations sitting next to amateur organizations, sitting next to, youth grassroots organizations. And I just think that was a real takeaway from this convention was how connected we all are in our world, which I think we take a little bit for granted because our convention spans from grassroots to pro and male and female. And when you go to other sport conventions and it gets super narrow, you just don't feel that same energy. So I think that was terrific. I think people were really excited about the presentations that occurred. They had some great speakers. They had some great guests that came in that shared philosophies from both the game model and the holistic part of developing athletes. It was a very wide but deep convention, and that's hard to accomplish.
Interesting. Well, in general, what were the kind of conversations you were hearing about or questions you were fielding about what's happening in Jacksonville?
Well, let me tell you, like USL was top of mind for a lot of people. I feel like I got so many questions about, tell me about USL, tell me about Sporting Jags. And I think the groundswell of interest in that tells me that there is an appetite for more soccer in this country. That to me was really encouraging. And I think when people start to hear sort of the backdrop of some of the tenets of what USL is trying to do, it gets them even more excited when they hear about that.
Becky, thanks so much. We'll be talking to you soon. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, Cole.
Before we go, I want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast. The Sporting Pod debuted this past week. Mauricio, Tony Allegretti, and myself talk about what's happening behind the scenes at Sporting Jacks as we get ready to launch in our first season of competitive soccer coming up in the next year and a half or so. You can find it anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. For Mauricio Ruiz and Becky Burley, I'm Cole Pepper. Thanks so much for joining us right here on the Sporting Jacks Report.